The windy, impenetrable forest does not wake gently. It tears itself from darkness with the shriek of tree hyraxes, the arguments of red-tailed monkeys in the high canopy, and the slow, continuous breathing of 10,000 dripping leaves. By the time the mist began to pull back from the tree ferns on the southern edge of windy, impenetrable National Park in southwestern Uganda, Ethan Cross was already standing at the window of his research station, coffee in hand, watching the forest reassemble itself into morning. He was 44 years old, broad through the shoulders, with calloused hands that showed every year of the fieldwork he had chosen over the university corridors of Nairobi's Department of Primate Biology. He had been stationed at the Rushaga research post for 11 months now, tracking the behavioral patterns of the Kayambura gorilla group, a habituated family of 14 mountain gorillas whose territory overlapped this southern research corridor. The station itself was modest, 9 meters long, 4 meters wide, hardwood walls darkened with moisture, a single generator, and a mesh window that looked out into tree ferns so dense the glass stayed perpetually fogged. He knew this forest the way a sailor knows a sea he respects but will never fully trust. He was about to pull his research notebook from the shelf when the sound stopped him completely. It was high-pitched and broken, wavering in irregular bursts with no rhythm and no pattern. A gorilla vocalization, he was certain of that within 3 seconds, but not one from any catalogue he had ever studied, not a contact grunt, not an alarm bark, not the belch of contentment or the pig grunt of annoyance. This was something rawer, something that had no entry in the literature because the literature had never needed an entry for it. He set his coffee down and moved to the door. Casey stood at the forest edge, exactly 28 meters from the porch. He knew her immediately, the second-ranking female of the Kayambura group, approximately 18 years old, 78 kilograms, a mother of 3. In 11 months of daily observation she had never behaved in a way he couldn't catalogue, but what she was doing now had no name in any framework he possessed. She was crying. He used that word carefully, knowing its weight. But there was no other word accurate enough. Her brow was deeply furrowed, her eyes wide and bright with a wetness documented in great apes, under extreme stress, but never once witnessed in his 11 months here. She was rocking on her knuckles in small, rapid movements that were completely wrong, nothing like the steady rocking of a gorilla at rest, and she was looking directly at him, which in gorilla language was a deliberate act, a choice made despite the vulnerability it cost her. His training said, "Do not approach a distressed great ape." His instinct said something older and louder than training. His feet moved before the argument was resolved. He walked toward her slowly, hands open, gaze directed just below her eyes. She did not retreat. She did not display. She watched him come, and when he was close enough to crouch beside her, she looked down. He followed her gaze, and every thought in his head stopped at once. At Casey's feet, half hidden in a root mass of tree fern, lay a lion cub. It was tiny, estimated 4 weeks old, no more than 2.5 kilograms, its spotted coat soaked with moisture, its paws grotesquely oversized for its body. One hind leg was extended at a wrong angle, the joint swollen to nearly twice the diameter of the other. A wound behind its left ear had dried into a dark crust of blood that tracked down the side of its neck. Its eyes were closed, its chest moved in breaths so shallow they were almost invisible. Ethan looked up at Casey. She was looking directly at him, and in her eyes, which he had looked into hundreds of times, he saw something that no professional vocabulary was built to contain. It was not simple distress. It was not instinctive alarm. It was a directed, intentional communication, a beseeching, the look of a creature who had made a decision, had traveled 200 meters from her group and her nursing infant, and had arrived at the one place in her world she believed could answer what she could not. She had brought him the cub on purpose. He removed his field shirt, wrapped the cub carefully in it, and stood. Casey watched him lift the animal and turn toward the station. She did not block him. She did not follow. She remained at the forest edge as he carried the cub inside, and when he looked back from the doorway, she was still there watching. Inside, his research assistant Moses Bayamukama was sitting upright on his cot, awake, eyes wide. He had heard the vocalization through the wall. When Ethan came through the door carrying a bundle in his field shirt that let out the faintest, barely there mewling sound, Moses crossed the room without a word and looked down. His sharp intake of breath said everything. Ethan was already at the satellite phone. Dr. Patricia Okoye, senior wildlife veterinarian at the Uganda Conservation Foundation's Kampala Animal Medical Center, answered on the second ring. He kept his voice flat and factual. the way she had once told him she needed emergency calls to be. Lion cub, estimated age 3 to 4 weeks, weight approximately 2.5 kilograms, Rushagar research post, southern Bwindi. Infected laceration behind left ear, fractured left hind leg, severe dehydration, unconscious, no response to light in the right eye. She paused. Then she asked how the cub had come to be there. He told her. A longer pause. She said quietly that she needed him to repeat that. He repeated it. She was silent for 4 seconds. Then she said she would reserve her questions, because they would be extensive, but right now he needed 3 things. Raise the cub's core temperature using a warm water bottle wrapped in cloth. Refreshed every 20 minutes. Clean the wound with antiseptic and keep it covered. Offer fluid through an eyedropper, 1 milliliter every 10 minutes. Sugar water if he had nothing else, and do not force it. She said she could reach Rushagar in 9 hours. She told him to call every 2 hours, and immediately if the cub stopped breathing. He hung up and turned to Moses, who had already started heating water on the camp stove without being asked. The 9 hours that followed were the longest of Ethan's professional life. He performed each task with mechanical precision, understanding that feeling was available only after competence had been demonstrated. He held the warm water bottle against the cub's torso, monitoring the tiny body for acceptance. He cleaned the infected wound in slow, careful passes with a cotton swab, removing dried blood and the pus that welled when the wound edges were gently separated. He held the eyedropper at the corner of the cub's closed mouth and waited. First drop, nothing. Second, nothing. Third, nothing. Fourth drop, and the cub's tongue moved, just once, just a fraction of a millimeter. He recorded the time in his notebook, 8:03 a.m. outside. Through the window, Kessie had not moved. She sat at the forest edge with her eyes directed at the research station door, maintaining a vigil that had no precedent in any published study of mountain gorilla behavior. Every 30 minutes, checking the cub's temperature, Ethan would glance through the glass. She was always there, still, watching, the silent anchor of everything that was happening inside these 4 walls. Dr. Patricia Okoye arrived at 3:40 p.m. alongside Dr. Kwame Asante, a large feline specialist from the Uganda Conservation Foundation's field team with 7 years working Uganda's lion population. Both of them stopped when they saw Kessie. They stood in the clearing for several seconds without speaking. Then Dr. Okoye turned to Ethan with an expression that had quietly abandoned all pretense of composure and walked inside. The examination took 40 minutes. When Dr. Asante straightened from the desk, he looked at Ethan with the expression of a professional confronting data that exceeded their framework. Clean transverse fracture of the tibia, mid-shaft, no vascular compromise, bacterial infection behind the ear, almost certainly from a predator bite, requiring systemic antibiotics for a minimum of 14 days. Dehydration severe but responding. Both pupils now reactive, the earlier neurological sign resolved. With proper care, a reasonable chance of survival. Then Dr. Asante said something else. He said that in 7 years working with Uganda's lion population, he had no record of a lion cub found in Bwindi. The nearest verified lion location was 85 kilometers away. A cub of this age traveling that distance was biologically impossible. He said the circumstances of this animal's arrival were outside his ability to explain within any scientific framework available to him, and he would be documenting everything in his incident report because it needed to exist on record even if no one believed it. Dr. Okoye left antibiotics, formula, feeding bottles, and a handwritten care schedule. She told Ethan to feed every 3 hours, maintain skin contact through the night, and call at any hour if anything changed. Before she left, she stood at the door and looked at Kessie for a long moment. She said that in 22 years of wildlife medicine across Uganda, Kenya, and the DRC, she had never received a call like his. She said she thought it would be a long time before she did again. The first night, Ethan did not sleep. He fed Bora, which was what Moses named the cub quietly on the second day, the Swahili word for better, with the 3-hour discipline of a man who had reorganized his entire life around a single small heartbeat. At 2 a.m. he opened the station door and stood in the total darkness of the forest, listening. Somewhere at the edge of the tree ferns, very faintly and every few minutes, Kessie made her low, 2-beat movement vocalization. In the daylight it meant, "I am here, moving." In the darkness of that night it meant something else, something that had no entry in any field guide, only in the older language that creatures used with each other before any of the categories were invented. He said, to the darkness, that Bora was still breathing. Then he went back inside. The recovery was not linear. A fever spike on day 4 sent the temperature to 39.8 at midnight, and had Ethan on the phone to Dr. Okoye at 1 a.m., his voice steady by effort alone. She walked him through the intervention, stayed on the line for 40 minutes until the temperature dropped to 37.9, and he heard her exhale. He exhaled too. Day 7 brought the first standing attempt, three-legged and trembling, lasting 9 seconds before Bora sat down again with an expression of pure offense. On day 9, Bora chirped for the first time, a small, rough sound of alarm when Ethan laughed, and he called Dr. Okoye to report it, and heard what he had come to recognize as her version of joy. Kessie came every morning and every evening. Moses began logging her visits in the station record with the same careful notation they applied to all field data, and Bora, impossibly, seemed to know when she arrived. On those mornings, before Ethan opened the door, the cub would orient toward the exterior wall with ears forward and body still, reading something from the air that no instrument in the station could measure. When Ethan opened the door and let Kessie see Bora on the porch in the early light, the gorilla would extend one arm toward the station with the palm open and hold it there for several seconds. He photographed it 17 times. He never found a satisfying explanation. At 14 weeks, Bora weighed 18.6 kilograms and was too wild and too large for the research station, which had always been the destination, the goal, the whole point. The Predator Conservation Trust had prepared a rehabilitation enclosure in Queen Elizabeth National Park's buffer zone. The morning of departure arrived with the same sacred stillness that the morning of arrival had carried, a symmetry that felt too precise to be accidental, and almost certainly was. Ethan held Bora for the final feeding, the cub's weight warm and substantial against his chest, the amber eyes that had replaced the newborn blue steady on his face. He placed her in the travel crate carefully. She looked back at him from the interior, with the direct, unguarded attention of an animal that had decided, without condition or reservation, that he was safe. He closed the door. His hands were completely steady. He was proud of that for 4 seconds, and then he was not. He stood in the clearing as the vehicle disappeared down the forest track. Moses stood beside him. The forest rushed back into the silence the engine left behind, all its layers of sound reassembling, birds and dripping leaves and the distant percussion of something large moving through undergrowth. He looked toward the forest edge. Kessie was there. She rose to her full standing height and extended her arm toward him one last time, palm open, fingers spread, the gesture she had made toward his window on so many mornings. She held it for 3 seconds, then she lowered it, turned, and walked back into the forest, until the green-brown dark had taken her completely. Bora was integrated into a wild Ishasha pride at 7 months of age, her fractured leg leaving no lasting deficit, the scar behind her ear earning her the name Alama among the trust's staff. She was observed moving freely within the pride's territory, hunting, resting, belonging, which was everything her survival had ever been for. Ethan learned this by phone on a morning very much like the one where all of it had begun. The mist thick in the tree ferns, his coffee cooling beside his notebook. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after the call ended, looking at nothing specific, moving through the architecture of what had happened and what it meant. What he kept returning to was not the unanswered scientific questions, nor the professional implications, nor even the particular miracle of a dying animal learning to live. What he kept returning to was simpler and stranger than any of those things. A wild gorilla had stood at the edge of a forest in the pre-dawn dark and made a calculation about a creature entirely unlike herself, had read something true in him before he had seen it in himself, and had trusted that truth more completely, and more immediately than he had ever trusted anything in his life. And because she had, a lion lived. Because she had, something in him had been permanently, irrevocably altered. There are moments that remind us that love, in its most essential form, has never required a common language, only the willingness of one creature to look at another and choose, without guarantee and without condition, to believe that what it sees there is worth saving.